Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
It's week 7 on Capital Outlook. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS. Thank you so much for joining us. To lead off today's show, we'll visit with Senator Bill Landen. He's the chairman of the Senate Corporations Committee. That's where House Bill 220 was discussed but never voted on. That's the National Retail Fairness Act. That bill, by all intents and purposes, is dead in the Wyoming legislature. The question becomes, is it really dead? As things can change, as we've come to learn. That bill would have directed $45 million to Wyoming schools. Next, we'll have an interesting give and take with the two majority floor leaders of the Wyoming legislature. That's Senator Dan Dockstader and Representative Eric Barlow. They agree that some long-term study with strong executive leadership from Governor Gordon is needed as Wyoming continues with its budget struggles. Senator Tara Nethercott is our Capital Outlook profile this week. Then the Vice President of the Senate, that's Senator Ogden Driskill, will join House Speaker Steve Harshman in our weekly discussion with the leadership of the Wyoming legislature. Senator Driskill is pinch hitting, so to speak, for President Drew Perkins, who's not feeling well. Finally, we'll end with a discussion with two freshman legislators. That's Representative Shelly Duncan and Representative Mike Yin. Representative Duncan from Torrington, Representative Yin from Jackson. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican, but they might agree on more than you'd think. Capital Outlook starts now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.
And welcome to week 7 of Capital Outlook here in Cheyenne. Again, thank you very much for joining us. Special guest, Senator Bill Landen, the chairman of the Senate Corporations Committee, is with us as we begin our show tonight to talk about a very important bill that came before your committee yesterday. And I'm talking about House Bill 220, the National Retail Fairness Act. It had a lot of support early on in the House. It passed through committee, it passed the House. It came to your committee, and my goodness, has the tide changed?
Well, reflecting, it's a lot of work that goes into an effort like that, and I really want to tip my hat to Representative Obermuller, who led the effort to take a look at how could we maybe take a look at corporate taxation in Wyoming. We've all talked about broadening the tax structure, and that was a bill that potentially could have done that.
But about $45 million in the bill was targeted for education, and now that money's gone. A lot of out-of-state influence came your way and members of the committee's way. How did that impact you with this bill?
Well, I think it's bound to impact. We had over 4 hours of testimony on the Senate side. That included, obviously, out-of-state attorneys and out-of-state interested folks, but it also included a lot of folks from in Wyoming. Some of the things that I think led to senators losing some of their desire to support the bill included the fact that it was going to take a lot of money to gear up in order to even collect the tax. So there was a high front-end cost on that taxation piece. Which
would have been a one-time expense, though. Right?
One time. One senator said, well, that makes it a lot easier to add anything to it later. And so there's always trepidation. We've talked about broadening that tax base before, and I think everybody's for that, but just about everybody said, don't broaden it in my backyard.
And you expressed that frustration yesterday to the point of you're asking constituents to say, okay, what do you want me to cut now?
Yeah, I spent the past 2 years, as you know, on our Appropriations Committee and going line by line through a budget for 2 years. We have cut public employees down to about 2003 levels. We have trimmed budgets. Agencies are tight. Schools, sure, we can maybe draw that in a little bit tighter. But the fact is, we have cut state government in most cases between 10 and 20% over the last 3 or 4 years. So, the old rhetoric of we've got a spending problem, not so much anymore. And we still have a structural deficit. So a little bit of frustration in the fact that that was a pretty good opportunity for us to broaden the tax structure. We just didn't have enough support in the Senate.
You made a decision to not have a committee vote on this bill. Walk me through that thought process.
Well, you know, we spent over the weekend, we actually took testimony last week and spent 4 days over the weekend, brought it back on Tuesday to give our leadership time to really visit with fellow senators. By the time it came to Tuesday afternoon, we knew where the votes were, and we simply didn't have the numbers. And so I didn't want to waste any more time or put the committee in the spot of sending it out to the floor so that it would simply die on committee of the whole. So we just didn't take a vote.
You gonna advocate that this bill deserves to be really looked at again hard in the interim?
I think it really does. I think there's opportunity for us to drill down in a couple of spots where there was some concern. One of the concerns was that it would treat like businesses right across the street from each other differently, and I think that's a spot that we can take a look at. I like the fact that it tries to target some of those out-of-state corporations instead of targeting our Main Street business. If we could still accomplish that and work this through the interim and come up with an even better effort, I think it's worthwhile.
On quick notice, Senator Landen, we appreciate you joining us this morning. Maybe one of the most important topics that have come before the legislature, certainly on the revenue side this session.
I think it's a big one, and I can speak for everyone in the legislature, we're going to keep working on this structural deficit. I know there's always room for us to tighten up a little bit, but I think this conversation about revenue is going to continue.
It's a tall mountain in this legislature, as you well know, and that needle hasn't moved much.
No, that's true. That's true.
Again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're on now to our next segment with the majority floor leaders of the Wyoming legislature. That's Representative Eric Barlow on the House side, of course, and Senator Dan Dockstader. That's next. Stay with us. And as we continue on in week 7 of Capital Outlook, we are pleased now to be joined by the majority floor leaders of the Wyoming legislature, Senator Dan Dockstader and Representative Eric Barlow. To you both, welcome.
Good morning. Yes.
It's been an interesting week here in the Wyoming, the temporary Wyoming Capitol. I want to begin our discussion with House Bill 220. Representative Barlow, it's a bill you supported, and that was the Retail Fairness Act that I'm talking about. It went down in committee Tuesday night. It earmarked approximately $45 million to education, and that bill is no longer. What are your thoughts today when we're visiting here on Wednesday?
I think in the end, what the House, the majority of the House, believed that it was a discussion that needed to be had. So we sent it to our Senate colleagues. And as you know, in the by Wyoming Constitution, all revenue bills start in the House. So the House gets the first whack at them. And so the House moved it forward to our Senate colleagues, and you know they've unfortunately folks have had more time to think about it. Whether the process, you know, when you have a delay, sometimes maybe that's not the best thing. Keep things moving and you have more continuity. But the delay gave people more time to reflect. And now there's concerns, and my Senate colleagues, you know, are working through those concerns. And I'm certainly not going to speak for them and the things that they're hearing, but we've been communicating with them and trying to let them know where we are as the House and how we came to our conclusions. But certainly they have the prerogative to vet the bill, and we respect that. And I think it's a little unfortunate some of the way it went, but I respect that they have that right.
From what you know today, would you still support the bill?
Yes, I would.
We had watched the whole process, and especially after it's almost kind of a difficult situation where the House has to start these difficult bills, they're tax bills, then we pick them up as they come across, and over time you could see the lack of support coming from across the state. Maybe not so much corporations tax as it was just the concept of more taxing. And so when it arrived on our side of the building, we signed it to the committee, but the momentum had reached a point where people were hearing from their constituents and saying, is this the route we want to go? So going into committee, we saw that the votes were not there. And so that was, it came to a halt at that point. Well-written bill, it's well vetted, well gone through, but I wouldn't say so much it's the corporation that we're looking at, it's the concept of the tax. You move out into the rural communities of Wyoming, and they're a little bit uncomfortable with additional taxes when they still see that we're involved in spending, that they question. We still have reserves, and the concept of adding a new tax in that climate is difficult to accept.
We heard last week from a good discussion with two members of the Joint Appropriations Committee, Representative Larson and Senator Kinski, about the state's education deficit, still today. And this bill, as we noted earlier, had money earmarked for education. How do we solve that deficit, if not for new revenue ideas? Let me start with you, Senator.
I think it's still out there that we can. We have done a lot of work in education looking at the spending there, but I think there's still an opportunity to find some savings there. Do we go to our communities and say, they see our schools, great programs, good teachers, it's all working very well, but they question, do we continue to add taxes to keep everything going, or do we take even a harder look at what we're spending there? And so at this point, we have to say, have we completely studied everything in terms of making sure that we're running a refined operation? I don't want to pull back on the good work of the schools, but at the same time, we really have to, we're living in a different climate. We don't have the discretional funds that we once had.
Can you identify for us what cuts in your mind are still out there for schools, which now have experienced significant cuts, most would say?
Now, they're separate budgets, the construction and all of that, but I think we really have to look hard at the money we spend on construction, but granted, there are separate budgets. But what I hear from our schools, there's still room to make the cuts, but don't ask us right away to do it. Let us work through it, and we can find those areas where there's discretionary money, and we can make it work at the local level. I think our schools understand the situation, but they don't need to be forced to do it right away. We need to have it kind of taper off and reassess what we're doing. We're doing it in a climate where we're losing students in some places because of the changing mineral economy. What do we do with those situations? We put a lot of money into schools and infrastructure across the state, but now the mineral economy is changing too. We'll find a solution.
Representative Barlow, what are you thinking today without this new money that might be earmarked for education?
So first of all, I think we have reserves, so we have a path forward for the next couple years to maintain, I think, the quality education we have. My concern is with the smallest districts. 48 school districts in the state of Wyoming, but those that are 700 students or less, 500, 300, those are the ones that really don't have the capacity to absorb big cuts. And so, much like we do for towns and small towns, is we help them a little more than we do the larger communities because they don't have the tax base. And schools are funded on property tax. I mean, let's face it, that's where we fund schools. And so in those smaller communities, they don't have the property tax base. So the state's helping them. Bigger communities such as Sublette County or Campbell County, where we have lots of revenues coming out, they're actually feeding into that system to help those smaller. But so we can look for efficiencies, and I have no problem with that. I have no problem with doing things better. Virtual education, there's lots of things that we can do, I think, that help us deliver a quality education to our students and hopefully provide value, i.e. lower cost, good instruction, good quality. But the smaller schools, at least that's what I'm concerned about, is the Glen Rocks, the Uptons, those Lusk, those small school districts don't have the capacity. So when we start talking about efficiencies, we'll be really careful that we're not actually, starving some of them out, completely out. And that's where I don't have any problem. The bigger districts have capacity, the small ones just don't. And that's where I get concerned.
So if we let things settle down for a year or two, what's the best way as leaders that the state should be looking at its revenue needs in this declining mineral revenue cycle that we're in?
I think we go back in and look at the way we're spending those reserves. We put out a concurrence on the budget, but I can tell you there were concerns on the floor that we were still spending too much, and we saw people pull back their votes because they don't feel that we have the spending taken care of yet, as you heard from our appropriations chair. We haven't completely finished addressing that. And consequently, we're seeing an increase in the no votes on the budget each year because of that feeling that, have we got that spending under control? We have to fully address that. In the climate of talking new taxes, we have to address the spending.
When will this legislature be able to say, or can it ever, that we've cut all we can cut?
In my own business, I ask that, and we still continue to cut. And we still continue to put out a product. We live within our means.
Does our means mean growth to you? Wyoming has tried to not only diversify its tax structure, there's been a lot of emphasis given on growing its economy. Are those two congruent with one another?
We're trying to do that in the tech industry, in the medical industry. We're trying new technology. That's not going to happen right away. You're not going to replace that mineral dollar as it has been, as it has supported our schools, our towns, as it's supported the whole state for many years. You're not going to replace that right away.
There's two challenges. One is the revenue side, and I think people need to understand where actually the dollars come from in the state of Wyoming. And they come from energy. I mean, the majority of the dollars we have are from energy. And there are challenges within that industry. So if there are challenges within that industry and our revenues from that industry are tapering or stagnating, then we have to have a discussion about, are we looking for new revenues, i.e. modernizing our tax structure, or are we willing to say we want less services? And we start talking about the human services, well, that can be education or healthcare or whatever, folks tend to be pretty reticent about changing that, or Department of Corrections. So look at the big 5 agencies that we have, and those are things that folks feel pretty passionately about. And a majority of folks, maybe not all of them on all of them. I mean, everybody doesn't value each one of them equally, but they want to keep those services. They want to keep those, what we do with the state, whether it's corrections or Department of Health or our roads or, whatever those things are. So it's probably 2 things. In my mind, it's 2 things longer term, is we need to have we need our citizens to have a better understanding of what our tax structure is, what we rely on, what you and I, the benefit we get from right now our mineral industry, and what that looks like going out, what the projections are. We do a CREG, and it's it gets updated every so often. But are we really looking out there 5 or 10 years? We're really forecasting out there to say where we are. On the same time, we need to do the same thing with our expenses, because when we see the convergence and revenues are going down and expenses are going up, we need to make those adjustments. We need to have that conversation. But I think it's a bigger conversation than, quite honestly, we can have at the legislature in 1 session or 2 sessions. It's a 5, 10-year discussion to get to that place where you find those balances. I don't know, it's going to take some leadership. I think it's going to take some executive branch leadership. I'm looking forward to seeing how Governor Gordon approaches his budget process, and then how the legislature may adjust our own approach to the budget. We talk about, folks don't think we've made enough cuts. Well, sometimes we can't get to it because the process stands in the way. And if we can start adjusting our own process and informing and educating ourselves better and all of Wyoming better about both the revenue side and the expense side, I think we can get to a different place. And I would hope it'd be a better place, so we have better balance between the revenue expectations and realities, by the way, and our budget and our policy wants. And there are policy needs too. I mean, let's be careful. There are needs we have, but there are some things that we would categorize, different people would categorize differently as these are wants, not needs. And we got to have that discussion. And I think that's fair, but I think that's a 3 to 5 year discussion with an engaged executive branch and a legislature and a citizenry that really wants to be a part of that.
On to your roles as majority floor leaders. I think you both should wear Fitbits if you don't already, because I think you walk around the room more than most legislators do. Has the role been what you thought it was going to be? You decide the order the bills are heard. How have you evolved into that role?
I'll say one thing I appreciate is he comes over, he walks, he does most of the walking. And he'll come over and check with me each morning and say, where are we, what do we do, what do we need to coordinate? And I appreciate that communication.
As far as my role, I think that I try to treat the members in the body, and certainly my colleagues down the hall, fairly. If there's a bill that's important to them, I try to give them consideration. We're looking at the list now. Majority Floor Leader Dockstader and looking at the list the last several days, because we're coming down to crunch time. What are the priorities? Where do we need to concentrate our time to make a difference for citizens of Wyoming? We do a lot of things that are nice bills to get passed, but we do some bills that are important, that really need to advance a cause or something meaningful on behalf of citizens, and that's what we try to prioritize.
What should the Wyoming legislature's primary concern be in the interim? What topic needs the most attention?
In my opinion, I think we need to take a hard look at how we're spending our money, and we need to go through that 3 to 5 year process and find a solution. We have a good governor in place to do that. He's intelligent on such matters, and now's our opportunity to move forward and find some solutions there.
I think it is the spending, but my interest is more on the process, to how we get to a better discussion, a more robust discussion about how we spend the money. Because I would respectfully say, in my 6 years in the legislature, now in my 7th session, the process actually stands in the way of having the most robust discussions about priorities. And I think there's ways we can adjust that. And I'll be bringing some of those suggestions to Management Council and to modify just how we discuss the budget, not just whether we spend money or don't spend money, but how we actually get to those discussions. So that'll be for me. However, that budget is important, but I think we still got healthcare opportunities we can address. I think there's still the education things that need to be will be important during the interim. But certainly, as we're going into next year's a budget session, the budget, i.e. with all of those different components, that's what's going to be the focus of our legislative work this coming summer and fall.
Well, to you both, it's been a good discussion, and I think an important discussion. I appreciate your time with us on Capital Outlook. Representative Eric Barlow and Senator Dan Dockstader, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
And this Capital Outlook profile now is with Tara Nethercott. Tara, welcome to Capital Outlook, and thank you for visiting with us today.
Good to see you, Craig.
You decided to run for election for Tony Ross's seat, a very popular senator who had decided not to run 2 years ago. What motivated you to want to serve?
I've always been excited about serving, been passionate about it, paid attention to the legislature and paid attention to Wyoming politics and how the Wyoming government was running. And I became aware Tony was going to retire from the Senate, and a number of community members reached out to me and asked me to run, and I thought now is the time. I have a desire to serve. I have the time to serve and the passion, so I went ahead and took the plunge and ran for office.
As you know, I grew up in Riverton, and so did you. Tell me about your childhood days, your Riverton High School days. What were you into?
I loved Riverton. Fremont County I still consider home for me. It's a beautiful place and a wonderful place to grow up. I had a great childhood. My lifelong friends are still there and scattered throughout the state now. I was very active in high school. I was that girl that did everything, and so I was in the newspaper and journalism class.
Now you're 5'2". You weren't Duncan basketball, so what were you doing?
I'm 5'1.5".
Okay, all right.
Sometimes 3/4.
We'll get there maybe someday, right?
Indeed, I'm still growing. I was of the generation that got cut from athletics. And so at that time, Riverton was in a population boom, and so there was a lot of students and a lot of talented athletes there, and I was cut. I tried out for basketball and volleyball and all those fun sports that you do in middle school, and quickly realized that maybe wasn't my forte. And that was a blessing, actually. And so I was able to focus my time doing other things that I find really have helped me grow, and I still use every day. So I did all the other activities.
So we're talking what? Speech and debate, student council, things like that?
I did DECA.
Okay.
I did Key Club. I was a lieutenant governor in the Key Club. I did journalism, newspaper. I was in the band. I did cheerleading.
What did you play in the band?
I was a clarinet.
You still play?
No. Nope.
Yeah.
Sold
Not going
that.
to see you up on the community band stage anytime soon?
I don't think so, no. I don't think I've got the capacity anymore. You know, I did all of those things. I also worked at the local newspaper as well and started my career there, actually, where I was fortunate enough to get to know Bob Peck, who served in the Senate at that time. Of course, I really was disconnected to that as a teenager, but was able to see him at work and knew he was doing very important things, and I'm very grateful that I had that experience.
Published in the Legislative Guide is you're a lawyer. You got your Juris Doctorate in 2009, but you have an undergraduate background. What did you do?
I did. So I received an associate's degree in pre-law from Central Wyoming College, actually. At that time, I was doing both some high school courses and college courses and finished them up there in Riverton because I also had that great job. So I was able to pay for school through that opportunity.
Right? Yeah.
That pre-Hathaway, yes, indeed. So I still have student loans because I was not of the time frame for Hathaway. And then, of course, went to school for a while with the law degree. My undergraduate degrees, both from the University of Wyoming, are in criminal justice and communication and journalism. So 2 separate bachelor's degrees, and then knew I wanted to go to law school and did that as well.
So when you made that decision, is this the time you're starting to pay attention more to current events, to state politics? When did that really start coming into your your purview, if you will?
Sure. Well, I grew up in a home that read newspapers, and we watched the news, and we paid attention. Although we weren't active in politics, nobody was involved in with any party activities or endorsing any political candidates. We just paid attention. And so I grew up knowing the value of that, and that was a natural interest of mine. And so I just always was aware and always knew it was important to be an educated voter.
Talk about the University of Wyoming. We're both alum. And you've been paying attention and now working to try to solve the university's housing issues. What are your thoughts relative to the university, Tara, right now? Certainly there's been a lot of change. You could just go down the line, a new administration, relatively speaking, budget cuts, etc. Housing issues that are on the forefront of people's minds, maybe some morale issues at the university. What is your general thoughts of the university that we both love?
I am proud of our university, and I see the university going in a very positive direction, and it will continue to be. There will always be hard times and hardships and new challenges when you're operating an institution of that size. But the support and the quality of education that the University of Wyoming provides is top-notch. I feel strongly about that. I was educated there. I know that my education from there has offered me an opportunity to be successful, to run a business in this state, and to make a living based off of that education. And my family members have done the same. And so have most of my friends who also attended the university and have very successful careers. And so I don't see that changing. The university is strong and will remain strong, and we will find housing solutions. We obviously need to find some maybe more modern choices.
Yeah, see, I wonder how motivated you are, because unlike me, you never had to live in the dorms at the University of Wyoming.
No, I didn't. As a transfer student, I was able to avoid that. However, I did stay in the dorms a number of times. My first time was in 1998, back when I participated with the Summer High School Institute.
There you go.
And
the dorms were really cool, though, right?
Oh yes, it was a very exciting time.
But how important of an issue do you think housing is at the university?
I do think it's important. I think that we need to make plans, and we need to figure out how we're going to pay for it now and what actually the university needs for long-term housing. I mean, those planning and preparation needs to occur if we need to start saving in order to provide funding for it in the future, or understand how we're going to solve that problem. We can't continue to house kids in those dorms for another 60 years.
Have any other activities that you got into in college, or were you just laser focused on your studies?
I, just like in high school, I did everything I could in school as well, and so particularly in law school, I was
marching band when you were
really involved.
Undergrad? No?
Nope, okay. I did not do that. In law school, I participated in the student body. I was president of the law school. I also worked in the library. I did the moot court competition and was the champion for a moot court competition, which was really fun, which is oral arguments in front of judges. I think
people might be surprised to learn that there is a competitive activities with law school.
Many competitive activities within law school, yes. And those activities really help allow you to hit the ground running rather than just learning about how to understand the law from books.
So you travel around a little bit? Is this something like there's...
If you win the local competitions, yes, then you can go off to the regional competitions and compete against other schools.
Very interesting.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about your first campaign. Sure. You're going to be starting, or this is now your third session.
It will be my third session, first term, third session.
When you were campaigning, you talked about, like many people talk about in Wyoming,
Yes.
the need to diversify Wyoming's economy. And you said this, but in order to do that, you said that the fundamental question first must be answered: why aren't we as diverse as we should be? So that was a couple years ago when you were running for office. Why isn't Wyoming as diverse as it should be? Have you figured that out yet?
I wish I had.
Yeah.
However, it's still a question that we're asking and we need to continue to ask. I do have some insight into it, having studied the issue before campaigning and continuing to study it now with a different level of understanding. And I think it's important to understand Wyoming's place in time. We're a young state, we're landlocked, we are high altitude, and we're rural. So we haven't grown because of our population, and that's a real hardship. So we're in kind of this cyclical challenge of having a workforce that's available to interested companies to do manufacturing. They might be interested in coming here because of our low tax climate, but we don't have a workforce that they need because of our low population. Or the cost of transporting those goods because of our landlocked nature or isolated location is challenging as well. Even with the railroads and the interstates that we do have, it's still costly to transport at those distances as maybe compared to some other locations that are closer to seaports or closer to other major transportation hubs.
So the answers. Endow is working. Other people, the private sector is working. I mean, certainly many people have thought about this for a long time, many sessions. Can Wyoming diversify its economy?
Wyoming will diversify its economy. It's a matter of time and patience. What makes it so urgent now is because we've been so reliant on our natural resources as a source of funding. And so when that is threatened because of the natural cyclical feature that it has, and then also from external influences, from regulations and otherwise, we find ourselves feeling very vulnerable and looking for other solutions quite urgently, as we have been doing in recent years. And so we need to really solve that problem faster and more expediently than maybe time allows.
2 years ago on our Capital Outlook set, Senator Ellis and you and I talked about women in the Wyoming legislature, or the lack thereof. The national trend is that more women now are coming to serve, where the trend in Wyoming is not necessarily the case. Have you thought more about why that is and whether there are systematic issues the legislature can address that can help the aspect of more women serving in the Wyoming legislature?
I don't know that there are systematic issues that prevent women from serving. I think that there are a variety of influences that result in that. One being the time that we are in session. As a part-time citizen legislature, if you don't live in Cheyenne, then you're having to travel to Cheyenne during session, meaning that you're away from home for up to 2 months at times, and getting home on weekends can be very difficult in January and February, if possible at all. And so I think for a lot of women with families, that can be a challenge for them to be gone for so long. I know that many of them are the primary caregivers and breadwinners for their families, and so the ability for them to serve is challenged as a result of just that reality.
Do you see that trend bending at all in Wyoming, or are you concerned that it's going to be this way for a while relative to the amount of women who can serve?
I don't think it will be this way for a while. I think that the trend has been cyclical as well. I think there are times where we've seen more women in the legislature than we currently do now. I know that there is a great deal of interest in it on a national scale and on a local scale, and it's just a matter of women just deciding that they want to serve.
Senator Nethercott, it's a pleasure having you with us on Capital Outlook, and thank you so much for joining on this profile and letting us be in your wonderful home.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you.
And we continue on with Capital Outlook Week 7 now with our weekly discussion with the leadership of the Wyoming legislature with the pinch hitter. Today, the Vice President of the Senate, Senator Ogden Driskill. Welcome, Senator. Welcome back to Capital Outlook. And the Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman.
Right, thank you.
You used a baseball reference in committee meetings earlier this week when you were talking about the lodging tax. And let's start right there, Senator. That's a bill that came through your committee. By the time this is aired, it will maybe have been decided. What is the Senate's view maybe on lodging tax going forward? It was well supported in the House. It's now in your hands.
You know, lodging tax is kind of an old friend of all of ours. It's been back in several iterations, and this one has come back in a form that seemed to be supported fairly broadly by all of the groups, and came into our committee, and surprisingly enough, TRW committee is usually a pretty big friend, and it was not an easy push to get it out of committee. We amended it up a little. It had some earmarks in it to direct part of the funds, which had been tried 2 or 3 places, and we pulled the earmarks back out of it.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, because one of those earmarks, it was a 80-20, and once that 20% hit a certain amount, money went to education. That was steered away to the general fund, and it's this concept of earmarks between House and Senate with different views, Mr. Speaker. Another bill was House Bill 220. We can talk about that here in just a minute. We talked about it earlier in the show, but there's tension there between where money should go and who should appropriate.
You know, in Wyoming, we have dedicated funds, and earmarking is kind of a federal term. If you read the definition of it, is federal Congress can attach earmarks or riders to any bill. Wyoming, you can't do that. It's single subject bills, but this word earmark has been used, and really it's about dedicated. And if you look in our, municipal government does it, probably do it in your own home. You take certain revenues to pay certain bills. I mean, that's just what we do. We take cigarette tax to pay certain costs in that area. And so that's been done here for a better part of a century. So it's not like, but this word earmarking is somehow like it's a negative tone. I think it's actually dedicating to solve problems.
And in this case, lodging tax money to fund the Department of Tourism.
Yeah, and probably a little bit, you're getting to see a little bit of the House and Senate, a little bit of different position as we can call them earmarks or dedicated funds, whatever, but the Senate's really taken a position that for these funds, we would like them to see them flow into the general fund or the LISRA, and then you write a check back out of that account for transparency reasons back to wherever you would like the funds to go to, rather than saying these funds are dedicated for a purpose.
Then the fight's on every 2 years.
It is, and that fight's a good fight. You know, prioritizing money through the Appropriations Committee and through our floor process is healthy. You know, we've got all kinds of needs, from mental health to schools to roads and highways to community college projects, and in truth, we've got a great system that we prioritize all of those. And then the legislature sits down, and it's a friction, because I have my project, he has his, and we prioritize and we write checks. And for me, it really is transparency. It's when we write those checks, you get to see who they're written to. They're not just funneled underneath the ground. They're written out to somebody, and you can see where that money goes to. And we're happy to do it. You know, we're constitutionally, we have to support education. So let's get that up front. We're going to fund it. It's a matter of, do you fund it that you don't get to see what the effects of that funding are doing, or do you write a check and say, this is where it came from, and here's why we're spending it?
I think an important distinction, though, to follow up
Sure.
on my friend Senator Driskill, we appropriate money. That's where the transparency, that's what it's all about. We appropriate money. What we're talking about is dedicated funds, so you have a bank account to write a check from. And that's really what we're talking about. About 80% of our funds are dedicated. Gas tax goes to the highway fund, right? I mean, so it's not a new concept. I mean, we're doing what we've done for over a century.
It's a good segue to another popular topic this week. We talked about it earlier in the show, talking about House Bill 220, which is the National Retail Fairness Act. Mr. Speaker.
House Bill 220, I think, is there's 48 states have this similar tax, right? And because, you know, when I was a kid growing up in the Midwest, we didn't have national retail like we do now. And so you have, and it's really international, right? And so most of these stores get built out on the edge of town. I remember in Casper, we had $1 million Business Ready Communities grant to build a road so a large retail would come on the west side of Casper. So here you have these services being provided. 48 states tax that. They tax them because all the rest of us in our local communities pay taxes. And so here this deal comes, and a gallon of milk in Casper at these stores is the same as a gallon in Riverton or Seattle or Washington, D.C. And that's that national apportionment. And so we're the 48th state, and we're proposing to be the 49th, and our population's the size of a large suburb of Denver. It isn't going to make one blip on the screen nationally. And I think the numbers we show, you have to spend $1,000 in a store to get a 3-cent increase. And so this money's already being apportioned every night. When the button gets pushed, the cash leaves Wyoming, and it's being apportioned somewhere else where they have a tax rate on this. Because really all we tax are minerals, a little bit of property tax and a little bit of sales tax. And so the choice comes down to us. Do we have folks pay their fair share and capture what's really leaving the state, or do you raise property taxes on grandma or on ag or on minerals or raise a sales tax? And boy, I think it's about a fairness issue first.
Senator Dockstader earlier in the show said this. He said, it's the concept as a tax. And while we have reserves, referencing the Senate, we're going to take an even harder look at our spending. And the whole conversation turned to about spending. The Senate, he said, is seeing increasingly no votes to the budget because he perceives that we still don't have spending under control. And that's the difference between maybe the House perspective and the Senate perspective. Let me ask you, Mr. Vice President, spending seems to be a larger concern, that it's still out of control in the Senate. Is that something that you agree with?
I do and I don't. So I'm going to say this in all fairness to the good speaker. We've got some differences on where education's at. So after spending a couple of years on the Appropriations Committee, the state budget's back almost where it was a decade ago, interestingly enough. Most of the public doesn't understand that, is Wyoming in the general fund side of their budget has actually got less employees and spends less money than they did a decade ago. And that comes as a shock to most people. They think we've got all this money.
That as well, sure.
So we hear it all the time. Yet on the other side of it, and that's, I'm going to hold him down in his chair a little bit, we have left education somewhat untouched, and it's grown. And our size of our schools has grown, but so has the spending. And talking to the districts I talked to, a lot of them, they said, if you'll give us time and let us honestly look at whether we can do more with less, and you'll treat us fairly, we're willing to do that. And as a legislature, we haven't been willing to sit down and have that conversation. We've got this constitutional piece that lays in there and a bunch of lawsuits. And I think it's a boogeyman in the shed. And the truth is, I think all Wyoming people, including education, want what's best for Wyoming and our kids. And that means you don't create this adversarial relationship. How can we make things happen better and easier together? And I do think there's a pathway to fine-tune education. We're in a block grant model right now. And when we walk in these block grant type situations, you can literally see you don't create a lot of really trying to do deep savings. And I think we can. I think it's a new look at how we deal with block grants, legislative authority, and local authority. And we've got a tough mix right now, and that's going to have to sort out over time. So it's a little bit roundabout, but I really do feel like we've got to look at both sides of the budget if we're going to solve budget problems. You can't take all the cuts out of the general fund, and you can't not have a piece of it that we don't look at.
To put a little more context, we have 10,000 more students than we did a dozen years ago. We got more customers. That's the bottom line. And and then we give grants to schools. First of all, schools, it's local property taxes are paying most of the bills for schools like they always have. What we've done is, where you're in Campbell County, where you produce more property taxes than is needed, it flows to other school districts. And so keep in mind, local people are still funding their schools primarily. And then we know what that number is based on the number of customers in each district. We know that. And so that money, that block grant, goes out to school districts, to locally elected school boards who ran in bigger elections than we did and garnered more votes than we did. And I think we're more conservative in many cases than many elected officials. And so I think that's the rub on this local control piece. But the bottom line is, we've got more customers, and you're going to have to find a way to do that. So I think, and we have, frankly, I don't, but in this budget that we're currently living under, The only thing that got cut was K-12 education. That's the only thing we cut. We never cut one piece of budget in this last 2 years. It's been 180 million cut from education, 400 million cut on the general fund side, right? And so I think you got to get the whole story out there. We have fewer employees than we did 12 years ago. We have a smaller budget than we did 12 years ago, but we got 10,000 more school kids in this state than we did 12 years ago.
I tell my constituents at home is the internet is so good now. So sitting on appropriations, a guy sitting on his couch with a laptop has access to the exact same information in the exact same time as the entire appropriations committee does. This deal that there's smoke and mirrors and something that you get given a stack of papers no one else sees isn't true. It's all online. The only thing the appropriations committee has, and you can listen to them on audio, is all the department heads come in and testify, and you can ask them questions, which, by the way, we get nonstop emails. The guys ask me, say, would you ask YDOT this? Would you ask Game and Fish this? And so they actually have unprecedented.
And that archived our audio is out there.
It's all live now. Live debates on the floor. When I first came down, there wasn't any audio on the thing. Now I have my county attorney at home, sits and listens to debates on bills and texts me live time on what he sees is happening on the floor as far as debate. So it's way tougher for someone to give misinformation on the floor, whether intentional or unintentional, because somebody catches you and it will come back up and haunt you. It really is very transparent now, the process we have.
Mr. Speaker, we have about a minute left. Something you had mentioned in one of the early weeks of Capital Outlook. Will it be next year's process in the budget session? And that is that will bills still require a 2/3 majority for introduction, or is there any change to that for the budget session next year?
Yeah, and the budget is the one exception won't require, but yes, that bill failed in the Senate yesterday, went through the House, 44 votes, I think. We'll keep bringing that idea. I think, it takes folks a while to get used to an idea. I passed a bill earlier this year, it took 3 times. And I remember when I first came here, an older legislator said, a good idea, it takes about 3 times to pass into law. And I think once we get into these longer budget sessions, like we're moving to, and folks want to bring ideas to solve problems for the constituents, and they keep coming up 2 votes short, but have a majority, that's a problem for our representative government, and I think we can fix that. It's not the 1970s anymore. It's all changed.
You get the last word, Senator Driskill.
Just what a joy it is to be able to serve the state of Wyoming. It's fun. We're going to finish up our House files today. The Senate's actually going to get through every single House bill, and it's really been a joy. This has been a good session. It's fun to work with our colleagues across the hall.
Well, President Perkins has been under the weather. We sure hope that he gets well soon. We appreciate you stepping in his shoes today. Mr. Vice President, thank you so much, and Mr. Speaker.
Well, thank you. And I'll echo what good Vice President said. It's really been a good session. We're going to get a lot of good stuff done, and we're going to hit the finish line. We're going to work every Senate file, and it's been a lot of work, but I think we're going to have a good product when we come out that people can be proud of.
Well, we'll see
it's
you.
Really an honor to serve, so thank you.
Next week, and it's been a pleasure to have you on Capital Outlook. Blockchain bills, a lot of success. Yeah. So
been a great year for the blockchain again.
Sure. On to our next segment, and that's with two freshmen who have a vibrant discussion here in the Wyoming legislature, Representative Yin and Representative Duncan, from 2 different parties in 2 different parts of Wyoming's economy. They agree on more than you might think. Stay with us. And as we continue in week 7 here in Capital Outlook, we're pleased to be joined by Representative Shelly Duncan and Representative Mike Yin. Representative Duncan hails from Goshen County and Representative Yin from Teton County.
That's correct.
To you both, welcome.
Thank you.
Lots has happened here just this past week, but I want to take you back maybe 7 weeks ago and ask you about how the transition has been for each of you from candidate to legislator. Representative Duncan, has it been what you thought it would be? Is it different? Give me an idea of what you're thinking now that this session is in the home stretch.
It's actually been a roller coaster, to say the least. I didn't expect that I would understand it and get it as fast as everyone kept saying, you're going to get it, you're going to get it. And it just seemed really overwhelming. And so that was a pleasant surprise, is how quick you understand the process and the procedure. the other thing that was surprising to me is you see on the national stage how partisan everything is. And I really haven't experienced that, that severe partisanship. We really collaborate with each other. We talk across the aisle constantly, all day, every day. It's quite different than what you expect or see here in the Wyoming legislature. Is nothing like.
Representative Yin, would you agree with that? You're a Democrat, she a Republican?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I want to add that on the campaign trail, just kind of thinking about what it would be like when you're actually in session. I did come to observe the session last year just for a week to see if running was something that I wanted to do. And so there's a feeling that as a Democrat in a majority Republican legislature that I'd be at loggerheads most of the time, but that really wasn't the case. You develop relationships. This is a body where if you want to do good work, you need to work together. So I think that's been a lot of it this session.
You two, you're from Goshen County, you're from Teton County, and certainly your economies couldn't be more different than they are. Representative Duncan, you talked about the need in your campaign for the state to develop an economic plan. You're from an area that is one of the few communities in Wyoming that's growing. What are your takes? I'm going to ask each of you individually, and I'll ask you first. How is Wyoming's economy in your eyes today?
We're still struggling, and it's in pockets, I think. But overall, I felt like we're pretty stagnant. We're not expanding beyond we have this old school thinking of just our minerals. We need to expand beyond that. I've been so excited and pleasantly surprised during session how many bills are really expanding our horizons with the blockchain, with the technology, and really looking out beyond our borders, beyond the traditional economic diversity. So that's been pleasant. However, it doesn't have an immediate impact yet on my area. So it's difficult. I'm excited, but it's a double-edged sword.
I think tourism is going to be a big part of the future of Wyoming, and it definitely is the basis of our economy in Teton County. I will say it does present locally a little bit of strain just because of the size of the growing tourism economy in our neck of the woods, but I think it's something that we want to make all of Wyoming become a destination. But I also think that part of our economy challenges needs to be thinking about different bases for how we grow our economy, what our tax base is and our tax structure is. And so I do want to emphasize that I do think a lot of the future of our economy is going to be technology. And I think that's going to be a lot of work with the University of Wyoming and making sure that they can build up an entrepreneurship base that we can help spread our economy in different sectors.
I want to challenge you a little bit there.
Sure.
From this point. I think many folks your age, and you're 32,
Correct.
One of the younger members of the Wyoming legislature for sure. You read often where many folks in your generation want amenities that they're just not going to find in Wyoming, that they don't appreciate like we do, the great outdoors and all of the outdoor recreation resources that we have at our doorsteps. They want different things. That said, can Wyoming really capitalize from technology, and providing jobs, et cetera, in the state, do you think?
I do think so. I think a lot of people, I think myself included, moved to the state because of the outdoor recreation industry. And so I think that's one aspect of it. I do think that if we really do want a younger workforce to stay in Wyoming and move to Wyoming, some of our maybe bigger towns and cities need to think about having those amenities to attract a workforce if they want both a workforce and businesses that need those workforces in the cities.
On to another topic as we continue this good discussion. Representative Yin, you campaigned on supporting anti-discrimination bills that might come forward in the legislature. Literally none have seen the light of day. What are you thinking today?
I observed the committee meeting when the one non-discrimination bill was in committee, and I do think that it's very disappointing that it ended up not hitting the House floor. I think, again, if we want to talk about our youth workforce, this is 100% an issue that we need to be looking at, because everyone, if they know a friend or they know, or they are that person, or they're the parent, or their child is an LGBTQ person, they realize that if Wyoming is not welcoming to that kind of person, neither their friend, their child, their parent, or themselves will want to live in Wyoming. They want to be somewhere where people are welcome.
Representative Duncan, you've thought about this issue, thought about it in your campaign. Your predecessor could probably not have been more opposed to anti-discriminatory issues that came before this legislature. Where do you sit?
Completely the opposite. I completely support the bill, especially this bill that came for anti-discrimination for workforce. It was actually even vetted through, and I don't know if very many people know this, it was actually vetted through the Mormon Church to make sure that they were okay with it as well. So this bill also has pieces in it that allows for the religious freedom to continue. Me personally, I'm a realtor. I'm a staunch believer in the pursuit of American home ownership. So I will never discriminate. And I'm a proud behind the fact that the National Association as well as the Wyoming Association of Realtors have a very strong influence in the fact that we have a Fair Housing Act, we have a Wyoming Fair Housing Act, and that we do not discriminate. Everyone jumps to the idea that we're in our Constitution that everyone's equal. However, that's great on the surface, that's great to make us feel good, but people are not treated equal. That's the difference, and that's where this bill comes from.
It's been a vibrant discussion from both of you, and I appreciate your time this morning on with us on Capital Outlook. It'll be very interesting to watch now as you go through the budget process, right? You'll see Governor Gordon's first budget in the interim, and you get to digest it when we're here next year. So best wishes to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a wrap now for week 7, the second to the last show that we'll tape here in the Jonah building before we move to the new Capitol. Are you both looking forward to seeing the new Capitol? Has the honeymoon of this place already worn off on you?
I think with we had the pleasure of being able to gavel in early on when we first got here in the Capitol with full construction gear, and I cannot wait.
I'm very excited. I've already had constituents who got confused because they drove to the Capitol and realized it was under construction. I had to tell them, you have to go to a business center.
Next year, then they'll be in the right spot.
Yes, next year they'll be in the right spot.
Thanks again for joining us. And that's a wrap for this week. Join us next Friday. We'll have an opportunity to visit with Governor Gordon, his first appearance here on Capital Outlook after a legislative session. We'll see you then.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.